My name is Nathaniel Evans. I'm 43 years old. I've been working as an international sales manager for over a decade now, and in my line of work, it's rare for me to spend more than a few days at home in a row. I'm always on the move, meeting clients, attending conferences, negotiating deals, and flying across time zones. My life is a blur of business trips, hotel rooms, airport terminals, and endless meetings. In the fast-paced world I've built for myself, there's little time for anything else. But I made time for Emily. Emily was my wife, my partner, the one person I believed would always be there when I returned home from another long trip. She was the one constant I could rely on in a life that often felt like it was slipping through my fingers. It wasn't perfect. No marriage ever is. There were moments of tension, the occasional disagreement, but nothing that seemed too big to overcome. She understood my work, or so I thought. She knew the demands of my job, the long hours, the travel, the sacrifices. I believed she was okay with it. But then, everything fell apart in the most unexpected way. It started one evening when I came home from a trip to Berlin. I had been gone for a week, and as I stepped through the door, the silence in the house hit me. It was too quiet. The house that had once been filled with laughter, with the soft hum of daily life, now seemed hollow. My stomach knotted, and I called out for Emily, but there was no answer. A sense of dread washed over me as I walked through the house, hoping to find her in the kitchen or the living room. Instead, I found her sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. She didn't even look up when I entered. I froze in place, confused by her distant demeanor. She had always been warm, always greeted me with a smile, even after a long trip. But tonight, she didn't even acknowledge me. "Emily?" I asked, my voice tentative. She finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine. There was something in her gaze that unsettled me, something I couldn't place, something that felt unfamiliar. But there was no warmth in her eyes. No love, no recognition, just a cold emptiness that sent a chill through my chest. "I'm leaving, Nathaniel," she said, her words flat, devoid of emotion. "I've made up my mind." I stood there, blinking in disbelief. "What do you mean, leaving?" The words barely left my mouth before they seemed to dissolve into the thick air between us. She stood up slowly, as if she had been preparing for this moment for a long time. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living this life." She took a step towards me, and my heart seemed to stop. "You've never needed me. You've always been so wrapped up in your work, in your deals, in your next trip. I've been invisible to you, Nathaniel. Invisible for years." Her words felt like a slap to the face, each one sharper than the last. I opened my mouth to speak, to argue, to defend myself, but the words didn't come. Instead, I stood there, frozen, as she walked past me without a second glance and started packing her things. It didn't make sense. None of it did. How could this happen so suddenly? How could she feel this way when I had tried so hard to make her happy? "I didn't ask for this life, Nathaniel," she continued, her voice barely audible now. "I've been waiting for you, but you never came home. Not really. And I'm done waiting. I deserve more than this. I deserve more than just being the wife of a man who's never around." Her words cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. I wanted to scream, to beg her to stay, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I watched as she packed her things, her movements deliberate, almost mechanical. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even sad. She was resigned. This was something she had already decided, something she had already accepted. She finished packing her suitcase and turned to face me one last time. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while," she said, her voice matter of fact. "I don't know what happens next, but I can't stay here. Not anymore." I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. How could I argue against this? How could I fight for something that already felt lost? Without another word, she turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing there, in the very house that I thought was still my home. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence that followed was deafening. I stood there for a long time, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Emily, the woman I had shared my life with, the woman I had worked so hard to provide for, was gone. I had no idea where she had gone, what had pushed her to this point. I couldn't even process the pain, the betrayal, the loss. All I could do was stand there, motionless, as the weight of her absence settled around me like a heavy fog. But even as I stood there, frozen in shock, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. This wasn't just a simple breakdown in our marriage. There was more to it. There had to be. For the first time in years, I felt like I was losing control of everything. I had always thought that I could fix things, that if I just worked hard enough, if I just focused more on my family, everything would fall into place. But now, I was left with nothing but questions. What had gone wrong? And why did Emily leave? I didn't know the answers yet. But one thing was clear. My life, the life I had known, was never going to be the same again. The days after Emily left felt like I was walking through a fog. I went through the motions, working, eating, sleeping, but it all felt like a blur, a series of meaningless tasks. I couldn't focus on anything, couldn't think clearly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her packing her bags, her back turned to me, walking out the door without a single glance in my direction. It wasn't just the loss of her that rattled me. It was the complete absence of an explanation. No goodbye, no explanation, just a cold, clinical exit. I was left to pick up the pieces of something I didn't even fully understand. What had happened? How had we reached this point? The first few nights were the hardest. The house felt empty without her, and the silence was suffocating. I tried to reach out to her, to call, to send messages, but she didn't reply. I could feel the walls closing in on me. She had left without a word, and I had no idea where to even begin looking for answers. My thoughts constantly swirled in my head. Was it because of my work? Had I ignored her for too long? Was there someone else? I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. Emily was my wife. We had been through so much together. The thought of her betraying me with another man seemed impossible, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I actually knew. I had been away so often. I had been consumed by my job, focused on closing deals, securing partnerships, that I had neglected the very thing that was most important to me. And now, it seemed, I was paying the price. The unanswered questions kept gnawing at me. I had to know the truth. I couldn't move forward without understanding what had really happened. I began reaching out to people, hoping someone knew something. First, I contacted her best friend, Sarah. She was the one person I thought might give me some insight into what was going on. We had always gotten along well, and I hoped she would understand that I was struggling. Sarah, can you help me? I don't understand what's going on with Emily. She just left, without a word. Do you know where she is? Do you know what happened? I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the desperation creeping through. She paused before replying, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. I don't know, Nathaniel, but she hasn't been herself lately. She's been distant, talking about how she's been feeling alone, how she's been unhappy with the way things have been. I thought she was just frustrated with the constant traveling, but I didn't know it had gotten this bad. Frustrated? It was more than that. It wasn't just frustration, it was a betrayal of trust, a fracture of everything we had built together. I tried to keep my emotions in check, but it was impossible. It felt like the floor had been pulled out from beneath me. She's seeing someone, Nathaniel, Sarah added quietly. My heart stopped. The words didn't make sense at first. What? What do you mean? Sarah sighed, as though she wasn't sure whether to say more. She met someone a while ago, Nathaniel. She didn't talk about it much, but I think she found someone who made her feel seen. Someone who gave her the attention she had been craving. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. She had been seeing someone. All those nights I had spent away, trusting her, believing in us. Had she been lying to me the entire time? Do you know who it is? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm not sure, Sarah replied, her voice uncertain. But she's been spending a lot of time with someone named Richard. I don't know much about him, but I've seen them together a few times. She didn't say much, but I could tell something was happening. Richard. The name echoed in my mind. I had never heard of him before. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And why hadn't I seen the signs? Thanks, Sarah, I muttered, my head spinning. I appreciate you telling me. I hung up the phone, my thoughts swirling in a chaotic whirlpool. Emily, my wife, had been seeing someone else, and I had no idea how to process it. I had always believed that the foundation of our marriage was built on trust, on mutual respect. But now, I felt like I had been living in a lie. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let her walk away without knowing the truth. I had to find out who Richard was. I had to confront him, confront the situation, and finally get the answers I so desperately needed. But where would I even start? How could I track down someone I didn't know? Someone who had been hidden from me for so long? I wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let this go. I had to find Emily, I had to find Richard, and I had to figure out what had been going on behind my back. I began my search, quietly at first, making inquiries wherever I could. I started with the cafe Emily had mentioned once, a place she liked to go when I was traveling. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I walked into the familiar little cafe, I scanned the room, searching for any sign of them. And then I saw him. The man Sarah had mentioned, Richard. He was sitting at a corner table, sipping coffee, reading a newspaper. He didn't look like someone who had been hiding a secret. He looked like an ordinary man, dressed simply in a navy blue suit, his hair neatly combed. But there was something in his eyes, something that felt knowing. He glanced up briefly, his gaze locking with mine, before quickly looking away. I didn't make a scene. I didn't walk over to him. But my heart was racing. I had found him, and I was going to get answers. The pieces of this twisted puzzle were starting to come together. But I couldn't help but wonder, how deep did this go? And who else had been keeping secrets from me? It wasn't just a question of finding Richard anymore. It was a question of everything. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, the world I had built. As I stood there, watching Richard in that cafe, I realized how little I had truly understood about Emily and the life we had shared. I had always thought I knew her, always assumed that our bond was strong enough to withstand anything, even the demands of my job. But now, as I watched this stranger across the room, I felt like a fool. I couldn't just approach him out of the blue. That would be too risky. I had to find out more about him, figure out what his connection to Emily was, and how long it had been going on. I wasn't even sure if he knew who I was, but I had a feeling he knew enough. Emily had never been subtle about her emotions when it came to me. I wondered if he'd been the one to see through her walls when I had failed to do so. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard sitting in that cafe, calm and collected, as if everything were perfectly fine. As if everything he had done, everything that had happened, was justified. I couldn't shake the image of him, the way he looked at me with barely a flicker of recognition. It was as though he was waiting for me to figure it out, waiting for me to make the next move. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I couldn't let this drag on any longer. I had to know the truth, and the only way to do that was to start asking questions. First, I went back to Emily's best friend, Sarah. I needed more information about Richard, about how Emily had met him, about how long their relationship had been going on. I wasn't sure if Sarah had all the details, but I had to ask. I need you to tell me everything, Sarah. I can't keep going on like this, not knowing what's going on. I'm losing my mind here. There was silence on the other end of the line before Sarah spoke again, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Nathaniel, I don't want to hurt you, but I can't keep hiding things either. I don't know all the details, but Emily met Richard about 6 months ago. She told me she met him at a work event, and they hit it off instantly. I think they started seeing each other not long after that. It's been going on for a while, Nathaniel. I'm so sorry. 6 months. 6 months. That was the same amount of time I'd been traveling for work without seeing Emily. And now, it made sense. She had felt alone. She had felt abandoned. She had found someone else who had given her the attention I hadn't been able to provide. And I had been oblivious. I felt a mixture of anger, hurt, and betrayal, but there was no time for self-pity. I had to confront this head-on. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, with making me feel like the villain in my own life. I had to find Richard again. I had to know how deep this went. The next day, I returned to the cafe. I hadn't seen Richard since the first encounter, but I knew he frequented this place. He had been sitting there, reading a book, as though he had all the time in the world. But this time, I wasn't going to sit idly by. I had to speak to him, to find out what was going on. When I walked in, I scanned the room quickly, and there he was, sitting in the same spot, looking as relaxed as ever. I took a deep breath and walked toward him. Richard, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I think we need to talk. He looked up, startled for a moment, but then his expression shifted into something closer to annoyance. He set his coffee cup down slowly and folded his newspaper. What do you want? He asked, his tone cool, dismissive. I took a seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. I know about you and Emily. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. So what? He replied flatly, his arms crossed over his chest. He didn't seem to be taking me seriously, which only made the anger simmer inside me. What do you expect me to do? Apologize? No. I snapped, leaning forward. I expect you to explain yourself. Explain what you're doing with my wife. Richard gave a small, almost smug smile. Look, Nathaniel, I'm not your enemy. I'm not the one who left her alone for weeks at a time. You did that, not me. His words cut through me like a knife. There was no remorse, no apology, just a calm, calculating tone, as though he had been waiting for me to finally confront him. You've been seeing her for months, I said, my voice barely controlled. You've been the one filling the gap I left behind. And now she's gone. You think that's fair? To just step into my life and take what's mine? Richard didn't flinch. He simply leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. You were never there, Nathaniel. She was alone. She needed someone. I was that someone. Maybe if you had been paying attention to your wife instead of chasing your next deal, you would have known that. His words stung, but I couldn't back down. I had to stay focused. I had to get to the bottom of this, no matter what. Why did she leave? I asked, my voice softening for the first time. Why did she leave me? Richard looked at me for a long moment before responding, his voice low. Because she wasn't happy. She wanted something different. Something real. The words hit me harder than any physical blow. So that's it? I asked, barely able to believe it. She just leaves me, without a word, and runs off with you? Richard stood up, brushing himself off. I'm not the villain here, Nathaniel. She made her choice. You're just too blind to see it. He turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving me there to process what I had just learned. It was clear now. Emily had chosen him. She had chosen the life she thought she deserved. And I had been too blind to see it coming. But there was one thing I still didn't understand. Why had she lied to me? Why hadn't she told me? Why had she let me live this lie for so long? I didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. The world I had known was gone. And now, I had to figure out what to do with the ruins of my life. I couldn't stay in the dark any longer. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no going back. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't done yet. I would find a way to move on. I would find a way to rebuild. I had to. The days that followed my encounter with Richard felt like a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control of everything I had worked so hard for. Emily had left me, and I was left with 1,000 questions that no one seemed willing to answer. I had been running on autopilot, pretending that everything would work itself out, that I could just let this betrayal slide. But I knew now that I couldn't. I couldn't let her get away with it. I couldn't let him take what was mine. So I decided to confront Emily. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe an apology, maybe an explanation, but deep down I knew that I wasn't going to get either. This wasn't about saving my marriage anymore. It wasn't about fixing things. It was about closure, about finding out why she had done this to me, why she had chosen him over the life we had built together. I called her. Her voice on the other end of the line was colder than I remembered. Nathaniel, I don't think we have anything left to say. I need to talk to you, I said, my tone firm. In person, please. There was a long pause, and I thought she might hang up on me. But instead, she sighed. Fine, but this is the last time, Nathaniel. Don't think this changes anything. The confrontation was set. She agreed to meet me at the same cafe where I had seen Richard, the place that seemed to be at the center of this whole mess. I arrived early, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. When she arrived, she didn't look at me immediately. She walked past me, sitting at the table with her back to me. There was no greeting, no acknowledgement. I sat down across from her, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. It was as though we were both waiting for the other to break the silence. Finally, Emily spoke. You know, don't you? I nodded. I know about Richard. I know everything. How long has it been going on, Emily? How long have you been seeing him? She didn't look at me as she answered, her voice low. I met him 6 months ago. It started slow, but he listened to me. He paid attention. He didn't look at me like I was a burden. I felt my pulse quicken, but I didn't let it show. I couldn't show her how much it hurt to hear those words. You could have talked to me, Emily. You could have told me you were unhappy. But you didn't. You chose to lie. You chose to keep it all from me. She finally turned her eyes toward me, and I saw something in them that I hadn't seen before, regret. But it wasn't the kind of regret that I wanted. It wasn't the kind of regret that came from realizing she had made a mistake. It was the regret of someone who knew they had already made their choice and wasn't going to turn back. I didn't know how to tell you, she said quietly. I tried, but you were always so busy. Always gone. I needed more, Nathaniel. I needed someone who would be there for me, who would make me feel like I mattered. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. What could I say to that? How could I argue with the truth she had just laid out before me? The truth that I had been too wrapped up in my work to see that she was slipping away, that she was hurting in ways I hadn't even considered. And now, here I was, trying to piece together a life that had fallen apart in a way I couldn't control. I never asked for any of this, she continued. I never wanted to hurt you. But I was dying inside, Nathaniel. I couldn't keep living this lie. I felt a tightness in my chest, but I refused to let it show. So this is it. You're just walking away from everything? From me? I don't know what else to do, she said softly, her voice trembling just a little. I don't know how to fix this. Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. She didn't want to fix it. She had already made up her mind. She had already chosen him. And I was the one left behind, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense anymore. I stood up, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. You don't get to do this, Emily. You don't get to just walk away and pretend like everything's fine. You don't get to leave me like this. She stood up too, her eyes filled with unshed tears. I'm sorry, Nathaniel. I really am. But this is what I need. I can't keep living in the past. I need something more than what we had. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I pushed it down. I couldn't let her see how much it hurt. I had to be strong, for myself, for the life I was going to rebuild. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said, my voice steady, even though everything inside me was breaking. But I can't be part of this anymore. I turned and walked out of the cafe, my heart heavy with the weight of what had just happened. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do next, but one thing was clear. Emily was gone. She had chosen a different path, a path that didn't include me. And I had to let her go. In the days that followed, everything felt like a blur. I kept going through the motions, going to work, meeting with clients, handling business, but it all felt hollow. I felt like I was walking through a dream, like none of it was real. I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation I'd had with Emily, about her words, about how calm and collected she had been. She had made her choice, and there was nothing I could do to change it. The house felt different without her. It felt empty, like a shell. There were no more sounds of her moving around, no more laughter or soft conversation. Just silence. And that silence was deafening. But even as I struggled with the aftermath, I knew something had shifted inside me. I had been so focused on my work, so consumed by my career, that I had lost sight of everything else. I had neglected the one person who had mattered most. I had thought that success would make everything else fall into place. But it hadn't. It had torn everything apart instead. I couldn't change the past, but I could change the future. I didn't know what that future looked like, or how I was going to move forward, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay stuck in the past. I couldn't keep grieving over something that was already gone. So I started making changes. I started focusing on myself, on my own well-being. I took up new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and slowly began to rebuild the life I had neglected. I didn't have all the answers, but I was starting to find my way. And maybe, just maybe, I would find something better, something more meaningful, something that would make me feel whole again. But for now, I was letting go. Of Emily, of the past, and of the life that no longer fit. It was time to start fresh. It was time to move forward. The weeks after Emily left were a whirlwind of confusion, but slowly, things began to settle. The silence in the house, once suffocating, became familiar. I filled the void with work and small activities to distract myself, but nothing truly made it go away. The more I thought about everything that happened, the more I realized how much I had neglected. I had been so consumed by my career, by the constant travel and deadlines, that I didn't notice Emily slipping away. And now, I was left with nothing but the consequences of my neglect. I started therapy, a step I never thought I'd take, but it was necessary. I had to face the reality of what I'd done, what I had failed to do. It wasn't easy, but each session helped me understand myself better. I wasn't a perfect husband, and I couldn't pretend that I had been. I had used my work as an excuse, and that excuse had cost me everything. But I wasn't going to let it define me. I began taking small steps to rebuild. I reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies I had long forgotten, and spent time on things that made me feel alive again. I realized I had been living for others, always chasing the next deal, but now I needed to live for myself. One evening, after a long day of work, I sat by the window, staring out at the city lights below. It was then that I realized Emily's departure wasn't the end. It was a chance for a new beginning. I had to let go of the past. and I was finally ready. The days after my final conversation with Emily were strangely peaceful. I'd come to terms with the fact that she was gone, that our marriage was over. But rather than feeling devastated, I felt a quiet calm wash over me. I no longer had to fight to hold on to something that wasn't meant to be. I focused on myself. The work that had consumed me for so long no longer had the same grip on my life. I started making real connections again, not just with people but with myself. I spent time rediscovering things I had put aside. Reading, hiking, learning to enjoy the quiet moments that once felt like wasted time. I wasn't sure where the future would take me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of possibility. There was no blueprint to follow, no expectations weighing me down. It was just me now, and that was okay. I didn't need to have it all figured out. I had lost something, but in return, I had found a new path, one that was mine to walk. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Life slowly started to feel like it was mine again. I stopped looking back at what had been, stopped questioning every decision that led to Emily's departure. The pain had dulled, replaced by a quiet resolve to keep moving forward. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I wasn't searching for them anymore. I found peace in the unknown, in knowing that life could still offer new beginnings. I started each day with a sense of hope, small steps toward rebuilding my future, one that was no longer defined by the past. I was learning to be content in my own company, finding strength in the silence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be, right here, right now.